Welcome to the Break Your Bullshit Box podcast, where excuses aren't tolerated and results are earned through authenticity, vulnerability, and a commitment to excellence. My name is Amber Fuhriman, success architect, attorney, and NLP trainer. If you're ready to bitch slap the bully in your brain, overcome the bullshit that holds you back, and design the life and success you've always wanted, then it's time for you to break your bullshit box and step into designing life and success on your terms. Welcome back to another episode of the Break Your Bullshit Box podcast, where we are helping you identify and overcome those bullshit limiting beliefs and excuses that live in your head. Just because your excuses feel real doesn't mean that they are real. And today we're going to work on exploring new perspectives that just might change the way that you see the world, yourselves, and what you can accomplish in it. Today I'm super excited to welcome Chris Rhyss, who really embodies what it means to live beyond the confines of conventional thinking. Chris is a former Army combat engineer and peacekeeper who traded battlefield tactics for intellectual combat as a postgraduate qualified journalist, tech entrepreneur, and accomplished author. Chris brings a fascinating blend of military discipline, journalistic inquiry, and innovative thinking to our conversation. He's the author of 5 thought-provoking books, including his latest, The Woke Paradox, which tackles one of the most contentious cultural flashpoints of our time, examining how a term rooted in social awareness became simultaneously celebrated and criticized across the political spectrum. His work doesn't just identify problems, it offers practical strategies for moving beyond the polarization that seems to define our current moment. As a 2-time Global Innovation Award winner and finalist for the Prime Minister's Veteran Entrepreneur of the Year, Chris is currently furthering his knowledge as a science PhD candidate focused on human-computer interaction. After delivering his TED Talk, The Uncomfortable Truth Between Right and Wrong, Chris has become a sought-after speaker on ethics, technology, and innovation across the Asia-Pacific region, the UK, and the USA. What I'm particularly excited about today is Chris's unique ability to make super complex topics accessible through his depth, humor, and genuine curiosity, whether he's interviewing entrepreneurs, futurists, culture creatives, or everyday people on the street. So let's get ready to step outside of our comfort zones, break your bullshit box as we dive into this conversation with Chris Rhyss. Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to dig into this conversation with you.
I am very happy to be here.
I'm super excited. So I want to ask you really quickly, we were talking about this idea of humility and kind of went down a rabbit hole in this conversation. And you were talking about how you've never been accused of being humble before, which I love. And the first thing that comes to my mind is your military background. I don't think that you can be really effective in the military and do what you need to do and question your own worth at the same time. Do you think that you kind of dug your heels into what you're great at there, or do you think it came from when you were younger than that as well?
I think it's a two-barrel answer. Mum raised us to have a certain level of agency and self-confidence and to chart our own courses. The only 3 things that she really said to us and showed us by her example as a local politician and community activist was, you will focus on education. So you'll get a degree, you will finish school. She was very unimpressed when I left in the last year of high school and ran to the army, but she was impressed that I was in the army. And she said, and you will serve your country in some form. So we've got 60 years of public service across my family. And the third thing was, you're accountable for anything you do and say. And then you get into the military and they break you down and build you back up, and they build up your self-confidence. And that does, I look at most of my military mates, we're all in our early 50s now. And that's something we still hold on to today that we take into civilian life. And I can't imagine living without it. So the comment about never being a humble person, look, I'm a very basic person, but I like the fact that I have the courage to take on stuff in life that some people might shy away from because I believe I can do it, or I believe I'm willing to have a crack and learn really fast.
Yeah, I think that people who call someone with confidence egotistical and arrogant question their own self-worth, right? Like there's true arrogance. We've all met that person that's just an arrogant asshole. So outside of that, for people who are just confident, sometimes confidence can come across as arrogant to somebody who
Yeah.
questions their own self-worth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's we've missed something there. It's one of my biggest bugbears is the term alpha male. And it's become a pejorative term now as well, too. It refers to these people in the shiny cars with the nice suits who go to Barbados and things. And none of that is about contribution or the actual person. It's about the things around them, their
Mm-hmm.
periphery. And whereas alpha came from a military term around alpha state, so that was people being highly capable and proficient, and it's things like endurance and integrity and mission focused and things like that. And now it's been watered down to the point where on one side of this debate, we've got people where we're happy to celebrate people as influencers on social media for being in Barbados and making the latest recipe or having great abs, and we'll celebrate that. But the moment someone like yourself or myself stands up and says, this is me, hand on heart, this is the kind of person I am, and yes, I will do that. If I commit to something, I'll do it. And for some people, it's scary. And your comment about the fact that people, when they're calling you names like, humble is usually used in a pejorative term, that label usually means inadequacy. You're labeling people based on, especially when you use negative labels, and I used to have to be careful about this, is when you append a negative label on someone else, that says something about your values. And I think that's really important to actually reflect on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm curious to know because when I left the legal industry and I started coaching and podcasting and writing and creating new content and things that didn't exist before, I had this period where I was being inauthentic without realizing I was being inauthentic. And part of it was because I had to put on this face for a courtroom. Walking into a courtroom, I had a role to play and I had to make sure that I was operating within the confines of that. And then when I started doing podcasting and creating content and writing my book, I had to find my authentic voice, which is not courtroom appropriate. And
Yeah.
I'm curious for you, did you have any of that in the military where you had become so polished in the military to fit a certain agenda? And now you're in these conversations about human behavior and this woke conversation and computers and humans and how they interact. Was there any period where you were figuring out what the new authentic you was?
I think I've struggled with that on and off across my whole life. In the military, I've always been a real book nerd, and I've always wanted to be a writer full time, which was a decision I made a few years ago. And in the military, I used to get so much crap because the guys would play cards and smoke cigarettes when we had downtime, and I'd pick up a book. I'd be reading Dostoevsky or Tony Robbins or something like that because I really enjoy immersing myself in a book. And then I get out here as a civilian, and I'm told, especially in academia as well too, I need to be less of my military self because I'm very direct.
Mm,
I sit down with public servants and academics, and I can't jump to the point of saying this is what we need to achieve. I need to bring everyone along nice and light and lightly and everything else. Don't scare anyone. Move at everyone else's pace, which I find really frustrating because I'm inauthentic. I come home sometimes so frustrated, I strap on my running shoes and run for an hour just to burn that off because anyone out there who has wanted something that has latent hopes, dreams, aspirations, whatever, that isn't actually actualizing those, knows what it feels like to be inauthentic. So for me now, and the preamble we had before this, we started talking now on camera, was that my life is so much better because I'm now doing everything I do now. I'm not forced by anyone else. It's all by choice. It's not always easy by any means, and I don't think I will ever not have issues with at times being authentic and inauthentic and trying to work that out emotionally and intellectually, existentially. But it is really challenging sometimes to, if part of you, one of my friends he's a soldier and he wants to get into community theatre deep down, same age as me, but he won't do it because he doesn't want to be judged. And I'm like, go for it,
mm,
man. Like the first time I spoke on stage in front of, it was about 200 people. I was terrified, and I'm a confident person in most social interactions. And then a couple of years later, I'm on stage in front of 20,000 people in Asia, and it's just old hat now because I trust in what I'm talking about. I know, and that it should come across okay. And I got off stage after my biggest ever session and went into a little breakout room, and I had 10 people in the room. And it was the most engaging conversation, and it became a back and forth. And I walked out of that room feeling better than the 20,000 people because I got to connect with people, and we really moved past what the labeled agenda was into me talking to Amber saying, so, I mean, my question to you and my question to the audience was, how did you find your authentic voice?
mm. Yeah, for me, so I can answer that right now, and it's actually hilarious. I talk
Okay.
about this in the book, and I've done a podcast interview on it. I was so used to being polished and having an answer put together. You walk into a courtroom and you have an argument prepared. Now, I practiced criminal defense, so my clients constantly surprised me with the lies that they thought they could hide to me that the prosecutor showed me in a courtroom, and I had to adjust, but I still had the plan, right? And when I started coaching, one of the biggest questions I would get asked is, how did you go from being an attorney to being a business coach? And I always had a well scripted plan for it. The problem is, I also rarely have a filter. And the more tired I get, the less of a filter I have. And I was
Yeah.
at a networking event. I had been asked the same question about 16 times. I was really frustrated with getting the same answer. And every single time somebody asked me, I became less and less politically correct. And all of a sudden, one moment, somebody said, "How did you go from being an attorney to being a business coach? That seems like such a big jump." And I said, my bullshit box overflowed. I had an emotional breakdown. And once I rebuilt myself, I learned how to help others rebuild themselves as well. And people just leaned into that. And the more that I sat in that, the more I realized, like, that's exactly what happened. I had this box of bullshit that I built up my entire life. And until I learned how to break that bullshit box and be able to have an authentic conversation about who I was, I couldn't I couldn't move forward. And people loved the concept, and so I ran with it.
And I think it's amazing, isn't it? And I applaud you for it as well too. Not that you're doing it for applause, but people lean into authenticity when they do experience it because it's so rare these days. We live in
Yeah.
a world where we watch Kardashians and reality TV, and it's all back to the social influence of things. And we're so kind of judgmental of other people and of ourselves that when we come across these beautiful moments where somebody really just bears their, puts their heart in their hands. I was on stage raising money for a startup I had a few years ago, and I told people about a suicidal ideation moment I had. And I stood at the edge of a stage in front of a few thousand people and just said, look, I ended up, after my marriage imploded of my own doing because of my lack of courage to go and address my PTSD from the military. I was standing on top of a 7-story building trying to work out if the drop would kill me. And that was the army engineer in me. I was doing the math to work out, am I going to end up in a wheelchair and be someone else's burden, or will I actually top
Mm.
out and, game on? And I shared that story, and the whole 3 front rows all just sat back in their seats. And then at the end of it, 10 of us had got up and pitched. And at the end of it, we're in the foyer area. And they said, go over and speak to the startups if you want to know more about them or if you're interested in partnering. And I had this line of people and just sitting around me. And I get really uncomfortable in crowds because of PTSD. And I'm inherently an extroverted introvert as well, too. So one-on-one, I'm really good like this. But when you're mobbed by people who are coming across, my first book had come out, they were coming across to get those signed. That was wonderful. I felt really good about that. But then having to repeat that same story over and over again, like you did when people asked you about your transition, even that, I can't even use that term transition now anymore because that's been watered down.
Oh,
And
hell no. I had a transition party for my office when I went from being an
ah,
attorney to being a coach. I did
yeah.
a transition party and I said, my address no longer identifies as a law firm. I just ran with it. I was like, fuck it. Somebody was like, you can't say that. And I said, listen, if they're going to get upset by that, they're going to get real pissed when they walk in one of my training rooms. So I might as well weed them out now.
Yeah, well, it was one of the best things. I had a really good coach, as we were talking about before we went live, who was a coach around my speaking and my presentation skills. And this is at the time where I was working for News Corp, so I was presenting to Rupert Murdoch's board, asking for millions of dollars to grow their digital products because that's part of my career. And so I get up there in front of people, and off the cuff, I spent 1 month creating this presentation that was so detailed, and I had half an hour or 20 minutes to present. And I walked in, it was the end of the day. They said, you've got 3 minutes. And the army side of me came straight through. And I was like, great, I know my stuff. So in 2 minutes and 48 seconds, I told them what I wanted, got the money I needed, and walked out. And one of the senior counsel walked up, patted me on the shoulder. He goes, damn, if we had more people doing that, I would have saved half a day. And this is a guy who's billed at $1,000 an hour, right? And I really enjoyed that because I think there's moments in life where if we're attuned to ourselves enough that we can see what's going on in real time and really connect to that moment where you're there, where you're actually really feeling it. You feel it in here and here. And
Mm-hmm.
it feels right. And one of the things my speaking coach said is, look, if you want to swear, and you notice that Tony Robbins has done this in the last 5 to 10 years, because swearing is part of life. We all do it. You stub your toe, you go,
Yeah.
fuck. And I love the fact on this conversation, you were the first one to swear, and I'm warned all the time not to swear. But as soon as I started being really honest, especially in Q&As at the end of a keynote or a working workshop group, people ask me a question. They'd say, "Tell me about a time that you failed," and I go, "Oh fuck!" I had my head in my hands. I used to apologize for it, and now I don't. I go, "Fuck, well, there was this one time. Here's what I did." And a great example that kind of wraps up the three themes we've talked about here is when I started at News Corp back in 2007. It was around the time we bought MySpace for $750 million, and I was on the team to actually try and commercialize it here. And I'd go into meetings with all these people from different business units from News Corp from all over Australia. And I'd walk in and go on Monday mornings, and I'd be chairing the meeting sometimes. And I'm like, "Hey guys, how was the weekend?" Half the team is female, half is male. This is 2007. And after about 3 months, I got a complaint and pulled into the HR office because I was using the term guys. And I called guys champ. And I've literally been out of the military for a decade, but I still use that lexicon because Australia is the big sports nation, right? Sport is our ethos. It's everything. So everyone's a champion, everyone's guys and boys and whatever, and you're never trying to be pejorative in any sense. And I was so blown away that that nuance of that language had in someone's head been weaponized that they felt like I was attacking them. And
It
I thought,
still
wow,
blows me away.
I'm being
I'm a
paid
woman, and
quarterly.
not once have I ever been upset at being addressed as "Hey guys" when somebody walks into a room. It blows my fucking mind that people get
Yeah,
irritated by that. That like
yeah.
is that all you have to complain about today? Because if so, your life must be pretty fantastic if that's the only thing that you can find to get upset about.
That's actually the comment that the coach said to me. He said, "Look, if that's the worst they've got on you," he said, "they're looking for something really, and they're not happy." He goes, "That's not your fight to fight." That was the best thing I could have heard, and I definitely think the quality of my engagement with other people now has changed because of moments like that where I'm like, "It's not about me; it's about them." And it's not
Yeah.
my job to babysit you and wipe your little tushy because you're a little bit upset. My job is to come here. I've been paid to come here, share what I know, learn from you as well too, because that's my favorite part of it when it gets into real discussion. But if you don't like the way I say something, try and separate the message from the person, or the
Hmm.
principle from the person. So you might hate the fact people hate the fact I'm covered in tattoos, and they all mean a lot to me, and they're authentic. This tattoo relates to a mate of mine I lost a few years ago. And everyone said, "Do not put tattoos on your hands, neck, or face because people will treat you differently and you won't be seen as professional." I'm like, "Who are you?" No, sorry. And so I got it done. And it's one of the most
By
common
the way, I
questions that I
love
get.
them. It's one of the first things that I noticed when we did the pre-recording. I love them. And I got the same comment about this. So
Yeah,
it's hiding. You can't really see it on the camera, but I have my whole,
I
there it
hadn't
goes,
picked
my
it.
whole,
Yeah.
and it is the music notes. I play the piano. It's the
Okay.
music notes for Tears in Heaven that we played at my dad's funeral,
Oh, fantastic.
that go up my arm, and then the staff part of the music slowly disappears and goes
Oh,
like
wow.
into. So I mean, I get it. Like, I got the same comment. Especially when I was an attorney, you can't have showing tattoos, and it's just such bullshit. When I wrote my book. To your point, when I wrote my book, Break Your Bullshit Box, my mom said, "Amber, why would you put that in the title?" And I said, to be honest, it doesn't get any better once you open the cover. I think the first F word is on page 3. So if they can't handle the title, they're not going to be able to handle the inside. So they might as well figure it out now.
Yeah, and I think that's it's kind of like a red flag to a bull to people like you and I when people say you can't or you shouldn't or whatever, because that's about expectation rather than authenticity. Like I saw Mark Mansour when he spoke in Australia, and The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is one of my favorite
I
books because
love him.
he's such a good writer. He's a really engaging speaker, and his point is really well made. And he talks about authenticity in there quite a bit. And I go to events now. I didn't used to actually have t-shirts on. And I'm famous for dad joke t-shirts. Like it's not rocket surgery is one of my favorite shirts that I wear when I'm on stage. And people are doing the cognitive dissonance. Is like you're up here because you're doing a PhD and everything else, but the t-shirt doesn't make sense. And I used to love that it used to throw people. And I think cognitive dissonance is a really good motivator for people trying to learn because I know this right now, but I'm going to go and see this person or read this book because I want to get from here to here. And the best thing you can do there is disrupt them as early as possible. And swearing, which you allude to in your book in your third page, and what Mark Mansour has done is like he's cut through the bullshit, and I think
Yeah.
that's really fantastic. And there's been a lot of people who come out and tried to emulate it after, and I've seen about 7 books so far, and I contemplated it really briefly, which I'll tell you something in a second. But I just think that they're all copycats. It's not as
Hmm.
authentic. They're trying to get it sold. But one of this, have you heard the expression "We're not here to fuck spiders"?
No, but I like it.
So Margot Robbie brought it up on, I think it was Letterman or Jimmy Kimmel. And it's an expression we use in Australia all the time. And it's, sorry, it just cracks me up every time I say it out loud and I'm being recorded. We're not here to fuck spiders means we're not here to fuck around. Let's get the job done. So
Yeah.
I've actually stepped in front of groups when I've come in and said to my whole product and commercial team, and someone has gone off on a diatribe. We used to make everyone speak. You had 30 seconds to a minute. Tell me about your weekend or what you're focused on this week. Someone started to wax lyrical like I'm doing now. I said, come on, man, we're not here to fuck spiders. And half of my team was international, and half of them just went sat back in their seats, and I saw them jotting stuff down. I thought, okay, I'm back into HR again. But it does talk to the laconic Australian nature. It talks to our we don't take stuff too seriously. And it also has a principle behind it. It's just the way you deliver it. And that's what you've done with your book. And that's it's a game we have to play is how do you productize and how do you market and advertise something that you've created, your digital progeny, your book, your message when you're in front of people, whatever it might be, and yourself as a person. You have to work out what is the best way, authenticity wise, that I convey myself to the world. So if I go to a session where I'm asked to talk about digital strategy or innovation theory, I ask about the audience, how senior they are and everything else. And as much as part of me sometimes wants to say, you know, you're all here thinking you know what innovation is, you don't. I won't do that for the corporate execs because you can't play with their egos too soon
Right.
because they'll just switch off. But other groups where it's people like middle of the market who are really hungry to learn, and you walk in, you go, who studied innovation for me? And they've all got their hands up. They can all give me the textbook definition, whatever. I say, great, get your textbook, throw it away type thing. Here's what innovation looks like in practice in the startup world and the commercial world. And here's how we do it. And it makes people uncomfortable, but it doesn't scare them. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
No, you keep going. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
No, I
you.
was just going to say, look, I think I'm glad I learned as I got older to actually tailor my message to the point where I wasn't being inauthentic by holding back. I was just nuancing my message to actually make sure that my message got across and taking my ego out about, oh, I need to be authentic. Well, I'm still being authentic if the message gets across.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting because I am a recovering people pleaser. And the reality being that you cannot be authentic and be a people pleaser at the same time. It's not possible because you are going to piss people off. And I used to
Oh,
say to people, like, I'm not a coach for everybody, and I'm not. But then if somebody rejected my personality or my message, I felt like they were rejecting me as a human. And I had
yeah.
to learn how to separate the two, that like they may not like me because of whatever's going on in their life, whatever I trigger. In fact, I was just having a conversation with somebody about this a couple of weeks ago. I spoke at a conference in Nashville, and my keynote is called Every Victim Needs a Villain.
Oh, well,
If
okay.
you're going to be pissed at the world, there's always that face that you see when you're pissed at the world. And in reality, that face is you. You just have
Oh,
personified it as somebody else, right?
okay.
And I was telling somebody this. I said, in NLP, we believe that if you have an emotional response to somebody saying something, it's because you have healing to do in that topic. You have healing to do in that area.
Yeah.
And this is your unconscious mind's way of bringing it to your attention that you have healing to do. The question is, are you going to listen and look internal? Or are you going to project and blame the world for the fact that you don't feel good about yourself for whatever reason? And someone says, no, that's not always true. And I said, tell me how it's not. And she says, well, I was at this event where somebody had asked me how many times I had sex with my husband. And I felt like that was a really inappropriate question to ask in public. And I said, you're right. It is an inappropriate question to ask in public. How long ago was this? And she says, it was, 6 months ago. And I said, if you didn't have healing to do, you would have said that was a really inappropriate question. You would have set the boundary and you would have walked away. The fact that we are still talking about it 6 months ago tells me that that question triggered something in you that you haven't healed yet, and you get to decide when you're ready. And I think that it's a really interesting conversation. And this goes into your woke conversation in your woke book. We live in a world where everybody wants people to tiptoe around them
Oh, yeah.
instead of to figure out, number one, why the fuck do I care about, like, when I told you about the transition party, when I said I wanted to name something a transition party, I got so much shit. So I called a friend of mine in the LGBTQ community and said, every single person that's giving me shit about this is straight. and in
Yeah, you don't know
heterosexual
the word.
relationships. So tell me from somebody who's in the community if this is offensive. And she says, I think it's the funniest shit in the world. I love it.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's always the people who are not involved and it doesn't affect in any way, shape, or form that feel like they need to get upset about protecting somebody who thinks everything's okay. And I each person gets to figure out what about that is about them that they feel like they need to protect the world. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you. So I'm curious to transition to that. Number one, what kind of shit did you get when you decided you were going to talk about this woke conversation? And number two, how do we get people to start stepping back and saying like, why the hell do I even care? This doesn't affect me in one way or another.
Look, it's two really big questions. I didn't intend to write the book. I was somebody who was getting constantly bamboozled by being attacked over words like transition and things like people policing other people's worries when if you cut to the matter as you did with the LGBTQI plus community and you go and ask people specifically, are you worried that I'm using the word transition in my invite to my party? For the most part, they go, fuck no, you know, and I one of the best incidents, I was sitting in a place in Sydney that's very, it's like Santran, it's very LGBTQ friendly. And so I don't have to keep using that acronym. I'm going to say rainbow friendly going forward, which
There
I've
we go.
also told this really hard. But so it's a rainbow friendly event. Everyone's drinking. It's a friend's party. I had a good mate who was a neighbor. Camp as they come. He's hilarious. And he's big boy too, covered in tats, loves the gym, loves his exfoliants. And we were chatting, we'd had a few drinks. And he said, look, you know, because it's funny because I always get these small guys that like me because I'm a bear. He goes, but strangely, I want to, you know, I want to date guys like you. And I said, well, am I your type? He goes, no, no. He goes, no, fitter or more handsome or something like that because I want a professional. And then we got into this conversation where I actually took affront because he didn't find me as attractive as the guy he was aspiring to. And my mate's listening to this, who's an ex-soldier as well, too. And he goes, what the fuck just happened? And because I'm so comfortable in this community now, because in 2001, I met my first ever gay couple just after I left the army, full time. And I was sitting in the Whitsundays, which is our beautiful island group off the coast of Queensland. It's stunning. So I'm laying by a pool, literally drinking a cocktail, and this couple sits down beside me. A pair of guys sits down beside me. We start chatting, and I said, "So how do you know each other?" And they said, "Oh, we're partners." And I said, "Oh, so you put a business together?" And then he goes, "No, we're partners." And he really accentuated the word. And it took probably 3 seconds for that penny to drop because I come straight from the military, and we had a very much a don't ask, don't tell mindset at the time. And I was like, oh, so I ended up making my excuses, going for a swim and disappearing. And I came up to them later in the evening because I've been raised well. And I said, I'm so sorry I made that uncomfortable. And I'll tell you why. And I said, you are the first gay couple I've ever met. And by the time they left, they come up, they give me hugs and everything. They stayed in touch for a while. And it was those moments that I really love. And today, those moments you can't do. If I'd actually said you're a couple and I'd made it look uncomfortable in front of other people, someone out there is going to fight the fight for them and say, I can't believe you said that. I can't believe you handled it like that. And nothing to do with them. Because woke was originally designed to be about being empathic and being aware and understanding marginalized groups, the fringe, whatever. And now it's been weaponized, and the polemic is just, I find it disgusting because it's polarizing straight away, which is the worst thing. We don't move forward if we're polarized. We move forward from sitting at the center of a table and or sitting across the table, and in the center of the table is the goal that we both want to achieve. And the reason I wrote the book is when I started to realize, speaking to people on the left and the right, fundamentally in the center, they all want the same thing. We want justice, we want equity, we
Yep.
want good schools, we want education, we want healthcare, we want defense, we want opportunity, we want respect. None of that is rocket science by any means, but the way that each party goes about it and their refusal to sit down at the table, I found frustrating. And then as I talked to more people about, they said, what project are you working on now? And this was book number 6. And I said this, and they're like, oh, don't go there. Don't go there. You're going to be shot down and vilified. Because my first book was about violence around the world and, you know, euthanasia, honor killings, suicide bombers, soldiers at war, police killings, vigilantes, whatever. And it was true stories of people. And I had to take down all my social media. I was getting death threats, reported it to the police. And because I don't mind divisive topics if you talk about them in a respectful way.
Well,
And
and
I
that's
think,
how you know that you're talking about something that matters, right? Like if
yeah,
somebody is so pissed that they're willing to send a death threat to you, and first of all, that's horrible for you. And I'm so sorry you went through that. Second of all, we're talking about shit that matters now. Like
Yeah.
now we're talking about stuff that we need to be talking about. And we tiptoe around it, and then we just pretend that we communicate well and that we're talking about real social justice things because everybody's happy. When in reality, like this is the shit that matters.
Yeah, and I tell you, I can say absolutely hand on heart, the most wonderful conversations and challenging conversations I've had have been with the people who have just vilified me because I'm the one who walk across the room and I'll see. I had one of my team social tracking what people were saying when I was speaking at a conference, and she would push stuff up onto my teleprompter in front of me just to say, by the way, this question's come up in the audience. And I said, look, I'm not going to name names. If somebody's just tweeted something about me being full of shit and you don't understand what it's like to suffer and be marginalized. And I'm like, I'm 2% of the community that puts on a uniform in defense of their country and signs a blank check. And I come out here and I couldn't get a job for a long time because I'd spent a decade in uniform. I had no real skills. I'd never opened Word or PowerPoint. I don't think I even had an email when I left. And I had to learn from scratch. And everyone thought you're a troglodyte because you come from the military. And I said, and it's a very light level of public harassment compared to what's gone through with the rainbow community getting into mainstream, dialogue and discourse and being publicly accepted. Like sitting down when we had the same-sex marriage debate in Australia and it failed the first time in front of our Senate, I was mortified. And this is a guy that, 10, 12 years before had never met a gay person. Because I now understand love is love. That's getting to the root of the whole debate. Who am I to say who should love and how you should live your life? And the conversations when I sit down and break it down like that with people who just vilified me on stage or in a group, and I'd walk across and say, hey, I'm Chris. I can understand by the expression on your face and the way you're standing, you've got something you want to say or you're not going to say, and I'd invite you to say it because this is how I learn. And it takes the heat out really quickly. And a lot of that went into the book as well too. So I captured over 2 years well over 300, 400 comments. Sometimes I'd be talking to people and say, look, I'm not ignoring you, I'm typing this up. And I'd go and research it. And I'd ask that to the next person I'd speak about and about. And the feedback from the book now has been really positive because it doesn't ever talk about a single person in politics. I'm not talking about Trump or anyone else. I'm talking about the fundamentals of politics and social justice and human rights and how people can be involved, which was your second question. How do you get people to take that first step? And my thing is be curious. And on my website, I mean, the first thing it talks about is empathy and understanding. This is how we move forward. And one of the hardest things I ever did when I was researching my first book, Good Reasons to Kill, was speak to a guy through an interpreter who was in jail. He was Taliban and he had killed, and his team had killed some of the soldiers that were people I'd served with or they had trained. And so you can imagine the emotion in that situation to be able to sit down from that person. And I'm really glad my coach had said, you need to adopt an attitude of appreciative inquiry, that whatever they believe is as true to them as what you believe for you.
Yes.
And what you're doing right now is taking the heat out of it. And I'm trying to understand you. And what this guy said was, I was just protecting my country. And what my mate said when I interviewed them, because one of their stories is in the book, he goes, I'm just doing what my country's asked me to do in defense of freedom. And now, who can argue with that? A guy who literally has goats and is growing opium for the Taliban because he has no other option and wants his girls to go to school, but he has foreign invaders on his ground is the way he sees it, because you're not going to change that nation with wars. It's been thousands of years of people fighting, but still we persist because the weapons industry is so powerful. And as soon as I started to bring everything back to a really rudimentary, what is the fundamental human need here? What is the thing we need to understand? That's how I wrote the book. And so the couple of people I never would have thought would pick it up when I was asking people to do reviews and give me their feedback would come up and after kind of one reading, give it a bit of time and just say, do you really think this? And then it was about the question they had behind the question. And we get to that as quickly as I could. And that helped inform the later editions. So yeah, it's been a interesting journey because I never would have thought I would have had to write a book that helped people understand, like I've just come to understand, and I'm still coming to understand, something that has now taken headlines around the world. So when we talk about these marginalized communities, in most cases, with things like the rainbow community, or I talk about veterans, or we'll talk about violence and things like that, these are small percentages of a greater society, but they dominate headlines. And just because they're smaller doesn't mean they don't deserve the same airtime as everyone else, don't get me wrong. But when it curtails people like you and me from being authentic in society, so we used to use the F word, referring to other guys who weren't as manly as us in the military all the time. And I still do it in closed environments with my friends. But out of respect for other people and not knowing the context, I won't say it out loud publicly when I'm out and about. And to an extent, that really pisses me off because we're Australians, we're the least offensive nation on the planet, barring New Zealanders. They're too busy chasing sheep. But we love to have a joke about everything. And so if somebody says, oh, you know, you're a big girl, I've got in trouble for saying to someone's a big girl because my goddaughters are there. And they said, that's not setting a good standard. And I said, no, because I think they can tell the difference between someone who's actually just being lighthearted. And if I fuck up, I'm the first one to admit it. And
Yeah.
if my life is a continuing series of fuck ups that I learn from, that's going to be a well-lived life.
Yeah. You know, I one of the things that's really standing out to me, there's two things actually. So the first thing is this empathy conversation.
Yeah.
People want to approach this defense of others as empathy, when in reality, they haven't taken the time to understand the other person's point of view enough to have empathy for them. And I think
Mm.
that like one of the things I always like to ask people when they come to me and say, "Hey, that thing that you just said is really offensive to me." And they're not involved in any part of the thing that I said.
Yeah.
You know, for example, the transition conversation, when a straight person would come to me and say, you can't have a transition party, according to whom? Because you're not involved
Yeah.
in this community. So if I say something that is offensive and somebody who it was offensive to comes and talks to me because they're involved in that community, then that's a conversation I'm going to listen to, right? Because you're telling me from your lifestyle that something that I've said has offended you, and I want to understand that to determine whether or not I want to change, right? And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day is do I want to change the way that I approach things? When somebody who has no, and listen, everybody has a right to be offended at whatever they want to be, but in reality, when somebody has no right to be offended because they're not involved in the conversation, I want to know if the person that has a right to be offended was offended. Does that make sense? Um,
Look, I've literally started this process going up to people in the rainbow community and other communities where, and I've only got two black friends, right? And my first podcast interview for the book was with a Vietnam vet, James King III. He's in San Diego. He's 78. He's awesome. And I said, I feel so uncomfortable talking about woke, where the term woke came from African American vernacular to a black man. And I said, I've only got in Australia, we have the Indigenous, the First Nations people here, but it's nowhere near as big a segment of our society and nowhere near as publicly debated and discussed their needs, which I think is actually an issue in itself. But he just laughed. He said, he goes, mate, I don't care. And he's a veteran as well, too. So the stuff off camera was more funny than the stuff on camera. We're
yeah,
swearing like troopers. We're talking about it. He goes, I think it's bullshit, right? Like both of us have put on uniforms for our country and we think in terms of life and death. And then you've got someone out there who's fighting someone else's war with no understanding. And so back to your original point is like, how do you get people to think about empathy? It's like, if you can't be empathic towards yourself and actually identify, if you're lashing out at other people on a topic, it usually, as you said, there needs to be some self-reflection and work done. It's very
yeah,
hard to be really genuinely empathetic rather than just try and get a bit of attention and feel like you're fighting a good fight by putting your hand up on someone else's behalf. So every single time I've come up against anyone who's said, okay, look, just a general person who's not involved in the actual physically part of that community, I go to a person in the community. And I was so fortunate to be living in an area. I had somebody who refused to use pronouns. And I was talking to a transgender person who was one of the most, oh my God, erudite, but also all over the place. Imagine Salvador Dali on crystal meth, riding a skateboard, holding a budgerigard, trying to make ice cream in a blender. It's that kind of person. And so I'd ask really pointed questions, and he, she, they were always on drugs. And that was their thing because they had deep-seated issues and they talked about that really openly. And they said, I'm so sick of people trying to fight my fight for me. And when I don't even fully understand my own fight, but I don't think we deserve news headlines over a house burned down and someone died. And I thought that was such a
yeah,
beautiful answer because I said, look, I'm not writing this book for you. I'm writing this book for the nut-nuts like me who don't understand what's driving all of this. Because you and I agree, and I'm sure your listeners will agree, and my listeners will agree, we all want to be respected, be able to chart our own courses, have a quality of opportunity, have a legal system that supports us, an education, a health system that supports us. Let's go out and do that. And let's stop worrying about minutiae because I want to be involved and I want my little voice heard for a moment and really start to look inward before we start engaging outward. And it's easier said than done. But my first thing was to wrap back up to your original question: how do you get people started on the journey? Just open your eyes a little bit as well too, because I think in every suburb, in every nation, you're going to find people who are affected by this who don't have a voice yet. And going along to a local community meeting where they're trying to actually, there was a community centre they wanted to do that was going to be rainbow friendly. And there was a lot of kickback because it was treated as the equivalent of a mosque being put up in the middle of a Christian suburb. And people are like, no, you can't do that because it's going to make our kids gay. It's going to erode the moral ethics of society. I said in this meeting, but don't you think everyone deserves a safe space? And if they're feeling that, then they go to a local YMCA or community, whatever, where they just want to hang out and not be judged or not even, I mean, we're all judged. We do it. We're judged, meaning making machines, right? We can't help but do it sometimes, or most of the time. But they wanted a safe space, and they had the right to actually petition government to say, let's use it as this. And in the end, they turned it into a library, and they had a little section out the back for rainbow. And I was so upset about that because we've got centres for veterans all over the country, right? And I have programs for veterans. My government has paid a fortune to actually keep me alive by putting me through rehabs and treatment for PTSD, where they electrocute your brain to rewire you. And I'm very grateful for that. So I get airtime, and veterans make the news fairly often here, as I know they do in the States. And it's a positive story. There's terrible stories about the suicide rate and the mental health, but there's a lot of positive stories because we've got Anzac Day, which is our kind of Memorial Day and Independence Day coming up in a couple of weeks. And we love it. It's like Army Christmas. But then you've got
Yeah.
this other community, which is about the same size, if not a bit bigger, that is over here going, fuck guys, can we get the same level of respect? And can we take the tension out of the debate? And I don't care if you're black, white, straight, gay, fat, short, whatever it might be, you have three limbs in the wrong place. You're a human being. And unless you're a
Yeah.
danger to other people or you have a mean agenda, you should have the same equal rights that I do as a very white, privileged male in his 50s.
I think that there's this deservedness conversation that goes
Mm-hmm.
on that is unspoken, right? I don't think it's a conscious deservedness conversation. I think that people look at veterans and they think they gave so much for our country, so let's have these conversations. And then they look at somebody who may be born with a disability or somebody who may be in a different type of minority, and they don't there's no way to say this that's nice. They don't care because they haven't been given a reason to care because they haven't had that deservedness conversation. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? And I think we get to step back and acknowledge that human being conversation. The deservedness for equality doesn't come because you fought for our country. The deservedness for equality comes because you are a human being. And when we start looking at it that way, then we start kind of looking at the entire picture differently. You know what I mean?
I think that's a really good point. If you haven't experienced something, you shouldn't be able to weigh in on it. If you've academically studied it, like I'm studying artificial intelligence and mental health right now, right, as part of my PhD, and I'm out of my depth all the time. And I would not go to a conference and weigh in on a panel yet because I'm not informed enough. But then I look at this from a human perspective. When I was looking at good reasons to kill, and I traveled around the world, and I went to the favelas in South America, and I saw these people who don't have TVs, they don't have running water and everything. They don't give two shits about what's on the news, and for the most part, it
Mhm.
doesn't make the news. And they were some of the happiest people I'd ever met. They're not worried
Well,
about
yeah,
being
and that's
judged.
the
They were
thing.
born
Like,
into this life.
some of them don't
Sorry.
want change, right? So here we are in the US saying, let's go make sure, just hypothetically, let's go make sure that everybody has a TV so that they can watch the news. So we fight for that. And then we take the TVs over there and they're like, we didn't fucking ask for this. Like,
Yeah.
we are completely happy with our life the way that it is. Like, it's really just such an interesting conversation. To your point, I want to share because I think it's so valuable that I can completely relate. I had a humbling lesson, and I will use that word intentionally after I said I hate humility earlier. I had a humbling lesson in this space because I teach and train human behavior, and I've worked with a lot of people who have PTSD. And I thought that I understood PTSD because I understand it intellectually and I
Yeah.
understand it scientifically. And then in July of last year, my family reunion ended in gunshots. And for the first time in my life, I knew what it felt like to hide behind a rock and hear ricochets from
Yeah.
gunshots.
Yeah.
And I stood in front of a room about 3 weeks after that event, and I had to do a speaking engagement, and neurologically, my entire body was shaking. And I've
Oh, wow.
never, like for years, I haven't been afraid of speaking in public. So I called my coach, and she is a veteran. She left the military with two forms of PTSD, combat PTSD and sexual trauma PTSD. And I told her, I said, I don't understand this. Like, I'm shaking when I go into a grocery store. I'm shaking when I speak in public. I don't understand. And she says, welcome to PTSD. And I said, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? And she says, you were at a place where you thought you were safe and it wasn't safe. And now what's happening is your brain is constantly trying to evaluate every situation you thought was safe before. And neurologically, it's rewiring itself. So we did some emotion work, we did all of that stuff. It was a reminder for me that because you understand something intellectually and scientifically doesn't mean that you understand what people feel when they go through it. Because the first thing that came to my mind was I stood in front of a room and told a veteran who for 8 years got shot in the military that I knew what he felt like
Yeah.
because I understood PTSD scientifically. And then for 2.5 minutes, that feels like a lifetime, I hide behind a rock getting shot at, and I can't stand in public. I had no idea what he felt and what he went through. And I think we need those experiences to remind us that just because we think we understand something doesn't mean we have any idea what the fuck other people feel.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that too, because I think that talking about PTSD. So James, that was the first podcast interview, the African American guy I spoke to. He said when they got back from Vietnam, they were spat on, and when our boys came back from Afghanistan, we applaud them in the streets. And when they came back from Vietnam, we didn't know what PTSD was. In World War One and Two, it was called shell shock, and the term mortified came from World War One, where the mortars would go off and people would be shell shocked and have PTSD, trauma response. But the one thing I will think that has actually really beneficially come out of the whole veteran debate is it's raised the topic of PTSD and trauma responses, because we have 2.5 million Australians roughly with PTSD. I've got complex PTSD, which is sustained trauma, which is most military people. You've got a level of PTSD because you have a neurophysiological response to a traumatic incident, which is natural, and you've sought remedy for that. And it'll always sit with you to an extent too. Ours is just more ingrained. It's ingrained to the point though, which is really funny, not funny. I won't say where this was, but you talk about being shot at. And shot at the first time when we got shot at, we just went, okay, cool. We know that sounds. We know what that is. Then we know what to do. Our training kicks in. When I was overseas at one stage and shots came about, I was there with two guys smoking cigarettes. I wasn't smoking. I don't smoke. And they're just like smoking. And we hear the guns going off. And like, the guy goes, fuck, I've just heated up the kettle. So inured to it that he's just like, he's butted out his cigarette. He goes, those fuckers. And then off we went. We did what we had to do. And you come back. And then I was sharing that story to barbecue. My first wife was a lawyer. I still is a lawyer. And she's just like, Jesus Christ, do you want to talk about that? Do you need to talk about that? I went, what? We got shot at. It is,
Yeah,
it's part of the job, right? It's not for everyone. Not everyone gets shot at. There's a whole heap of trauma happens in PTSD from people deployed to operational zones, including aid care workers, truck drivers, medics, and things like that, because they're in a complete threat environment. And if you're not trained for it, and in our cases, even when you are trained for it, doesn't mean it's not going to be around for the rest of your life. So I go to the cinema. I seem really functional now, and I'm sitting in my nice safe place, and I've got my tea and everything else with me. I go to the cinema at 10 o'clock in the morning, so there's minimal people in the room. I try to avoid shopping centres. Loud noises send me into sweats sometimes. My sleep is so all over the place. I used to sleep in a separate room for my ex-wife. But I do like the fact that there are avenues out there, because I looked within. After my second marriage devolved because of my cowardice in looking inward, I went out and got help, and I'm still getting help, and I will get help for the rest of my life. But I'm glad that I had the courage to look in when it finally became too much. And to the point where I've
yeah,
always had a complicated relationship with alcohol as a coping mechanism. And I stopped drinking altogether 2 months ago. And
good
to
for
the
you.
point I changed medications and changed therapists. And the quality of my life has dramatically changed because I admitted something wasn't right. I wasn't fully in control, and something needed to be done. And that's what we all need to do. I'll circle back to the woke debate. Something's not right out there. that we are actually feeling like we need to fight other people's fights. We want to be angry for the sense of being angry because we have a genuine sense of ennui and existential frustration in society that's telling us what to do, how to live, and we're feeling lost and confused, and everyone's yelling at us and all these distractions that people don't have time to sit back and just be. Look
Yeah.
within. What do I want? What's really important to me? Do I really give two flying fucks about Chelsea Handler with the Uganda special because she's offended Ugandans? And there was a great comment in there from a African American woman. She goes, I'm embarrassed that I'm here because this is white privilege in action. You've got a white person, a white camera crew, all having this debate. You're going to benefit off this and everything else, but what's going to change? And
Mm-hmm.
if I was Chelsea Handler in that situation, or I'd be in the room, I would have said, take that message back into your community. And anything you hear in here, that frustration is valid, absolutely. What do you specifically want? Lock in on one issue, and this is for anyone can do this. Lock in on one issue that's important to you. Like same-sex marriage was a big thing here, and a lot of people were deeply, deeply, bitterly disappointed they didn't get across the line the first time because we felt like we were cavemen. That this is a reflection of us being morally in the 1800s, and that comment was made in very different ways quite a few times. And so now with these new debates around pronouns, which I don't fully understand yet, but putting in gender neutral bathrooms. So there was a piece of something I read about 6 months ago in the States. The cost to actually fit out public service buildings across the US to put in neutral bathrooms was in the billions. And to serve a small percentage of the community, absolutely, I respect everyone's rights. And I do think there's something we need to do around actually working out where you go for your revolutions and things. But where could those billions be used for the mainstream as equally? Or could you halve it? You know, these kind of debates need to be had across the table. People spitball until we get to a point of agreement. Then you lobby the community, then you lobby your Senate, and then it becomes what was once heresy becomes commonplace. And it's happened with pretty much everything. So in 5 years' time, I think we'll be having a very different conversation about this. And when I'm in a nursing home in my wheelchair, racing my mate up and down the halls and everything, and we're still calling each other the F word because we're still 14-year-old boys in our heads, I would like to think that everyone has a voice at the table. We understand that politicians have put their bias and we use that power accordingly. But we also understand our own agency that if I think something's wrong and I understand it and I want something done, I believe I have the volition or the ability to go and find ways to bring that to life or to have that heard. And that is valid. Everyone has a voice. So
Yeah.
that's my hope with the book is that people read it and
Very
go,
well
oh,
said.
fuck, I can do something good in the world. Here's where I want to start.
Yeah, very well said. It's interesting because sometimes you post things to social media thinking this is going to be something everybody agrees with, and then you find out how wrong you are that and I'm shocked that not everybody agrees with
Yeah,
it.
in there.
And I had posted this post and I said, if you're triggered by it was something along the lines of it's not my job not to trigger you, it's your job to heal the reason that you're triggered.
Yeah.
And I thought this is like a universally accepted thing. And I was unprepared for the amount of people I was going to piss off with that post.
Oh, well.
But somebody commented on it and they said, yeah, but um, sometimes if you love somebody, you would change the way that you talk around them so that you don't trigger them.
Yeah.
And I remember responding to her in private and saying something along the lines of, I'm less curious about why the people that love you aren't willing to adjust whatever they're talking about because it offends you, and more curious as to why you keep putting yourself in situations where you choose to be offended, right? And I think we get to have this conversation about like if I think there's a difference, and this is kind of the road I wanted to go down to wrap this up. I think there's a difference between me saying something with the intention of offending somebody, like that's an asshole move, and me being authentic to who I am and that authenticity upsetting somebody. And if my authenticity upsets somebody and I'm not willing to change that, that is a me problem. I am obviously willing to lose people in my life. If you're offended by somebody's authenticity and you keep putting yourself in their circle, that is a you conversation. And I think that's the conversation we get to have is why are we still putting ourselves in situations where we know we're going to be offended and expecting the other person to change instead of setting boundaries to protect our own peace.
Well, there's so many ways you could approach that. This works in my head. The first thing that came to mind is, when you walk around and you see, you bought a new outfit, you think it looks great on you, and you're walking down the road, one person is on their phone, they look at you and they kind of look you up and down and they frown. And you go, oh, and the first thing you think about is, oh my God, it's what I'm wearing, it's my hair, it's whatever. And it could have been something that was said on the phone, right? I do it all the time subconsciously, because everyone thinks everyone else is thinking about them and checking, and we're worried how other people see us, right? The whole time we live our lives and walk out the door, there's a part of us that's worried about being judged. And judge not lest ye be judged comes into relevance here as well too, because I think I do agree with your point that if you're going out to do arsehole moves and be divisive and be a shock jock like Howard Stern and those kind of people, then, great. They build a business out of that and they build a living out of that, and that's great. And people will align with those people because they want to be shocked. Because for the most part, it's entertainment. It's the same as reality TV, right? I think what I really like seeing in the world is people who, like yourself and myself, in the sense that if we offend, because intention is very different from outcome. If people don't understand your intention from the start, and so this really does become incumbent on people who are better communicators and who have the intent. My intention is this, is get that intention out there pretty early and own it, be public about it, right? So I'm intentionally divisive on some subjects by the nature of I like to write about contentious subjects, mostly because I want to understand. Then I hope to convey it in a way that doesn't offend, but does challenge. And so I'd invite any of your listeners, go to thewokeparadox.com, give me a comment. If you think I've said something that is actually incorrect, or you don't understand something, or you want to actually add your voice into the mix, let me know. Because, I think there's a lot of people out there. If you've got genuine frustration with yourself, with the world, whatever, the best thing you can actually go and do is find something that you can vent your rage at. And it's perfect. In the world right now, it's very confusing, it's very loud, it's coming at you from 100 different miles an hour, 24/7. Everyone has a bit of, we need to get off our chest. And so the first time that somebody just says, I say guys in a meeting, I've seen people literally get up and walk out because that was enough. That broke them. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And she said, that's all about them. And that's fine, because if nobody else in the room reacted, but that one person walks out, it's clearly that, it's their issue. But I do think you have to be responsible as communicators. And some of the stuff I've said trivially over the years, my friends will apologize and say, oh, that's just Chris, he's outspoken, whatever. But, and I've heard about it later where I haven't known at the time that I've actually just offended someone, and they haven't thought you're allowed to go over and correct someone, because I'm the first guy like yourself. Please tell me if I've fucked up. And that should be the way we all communicate, right? Especially in relationships, is that, in a relationship, if you said something on your partner's face, their actions, or they're stonewalling you, or your friends, that you want to, because you have more emotion invested in it, that you want to actually understand what's going on. Yeah, you're going to be defensive. Yeah, you're going to be kind of on the back foot. But the courage to walk across and say, did I fuck up, or am I missing something here, is what makes us us. The ability to go from the Wright brothers doing a 120-meter flight and then 90 years later we're on the moon is the human ability to adapt and move really quickly and for change to happen. I mean, was it Da Vinci or whoever it was that came up with the first flying helicopter that didn't really fly? That was hundreds of years ago. Then when we decided, because everyone said he couldn't do it, and then the Wright brothers and a bunch of other people had actually had flights at that time, and they were on the moon 2 generations later. So I just think generationally, like the way that my parents were raised, and it was all about buying a house, getting kids through school, having something to retire on, and you didn't go out for the most part and try and make a name for yourself. It was much more, I would say, humble, back to that word again, generation. Whereas our generation, my generation specifically, was where the start of the tech came around, so you can make billions overnight type thing. And now with this younger generation that will probably never own a house outright. And so their priorities shift. A lot of them don't want to actually have kids and families. So in Australia, we actually have a declining birth rate, and it's a real issue. So all these things change over time. And I think that popular discourse, public discourse, and internal discourse will evolve over time as well too, because I think when more people look inwards and you look at what really gets to you emotionally, and if you just use that, look at the next day that you spend and walk around, and if something gets to you, just try and have a look at what was under that. Because I was institutionally trained to be racist when I was in the military. We used to have targets we shot at and trained on that were Asian. And it wasn't until the early 2000s we got rid of those. And I never thought anything about it because our last war was in Asia. So we're able to change. It's the willingness to change and to show empathy and understanding and get our heads out of our own asses sometimes. And actually,
Yeah.
if you want to weigh in on the debate, great, absolutely, I applaud that. Do it informed. And if you're not informed yet, go and find your fucking answers.
Yeah. No, I love that so much. I think if we could sum this conversation up into a few words, it would be, for me at least, it would be curious, have uncomfortable
Mhm.
conversations, and give a shit about other people and their feelings. Like it's really what it comes down to, you know?
Yeah,
I am always the type of person that wants to make sure that I don't like there's this line of I care if I've offended people 100% of the time. 100% of the time. The then question I get to have is that thing that I did that offended that person so core to my identity that I'm not willing to change it? And I think it comes down to if somebody was to say to me, Amber, I'm no longer going to be a friend with you if you don't stop swearing, I'd be like, then fuck off because
yeah,
we're good. Like that is that who I am. That is so core to my identity of who I am that I don't, if you're offended by that, that's about you. That's not about me. If they then say, it offends me that you use this term to describe me because that's not how I see myself, then that's a conversation I want to have because that's no longer about me and my identity. That's about empathy for you and how you want to be treated and communicated with. And I think people confuse the two. They confuse this like, I'm in this environment. I'm this type of person. So anything other than that offends me and I don't have to cater to it. And I think that's where we start rubbing people the wrong way and get called assholes. And they're right.
yeah. And no, I agree. Look, I think, and you used the word comfort 3 times there, and comfort is the problem. We've got such comfortable existences now, especially in the middle class. Somebody said to me the other day, there is no middle class left in America. I said, there is. You just can't hear them because the polarizing, oh, it's a puppy. Nice.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a big dog fan. Hello, gorgeous.
Mm.
My big thing is I find people are so comfortable in their existences, they're almost sometimes looking to pick a fight because we
Mm-hmm.
are taught from a really early age to get along with everyone else. Here's the rules of society. Like, the simplest thing that gets to me still as a runner, if you come to my country and to Australia, we travel on the left-hand side of the road or the footpath in our direction. People come in from internationally, and I'm going for a run in the morning, and they're walking on my side coming straight at me. I don't move. I'm 6'2", 100 kilos. And just see people get really offended by that. But I get offended that they're in my way because they're not playing by the rules. And then I start laughing to myself for the rest of the jog because I'm such a tool. It's literally, I could have just jogged around them. But
Yeah.
if you stop for a second of personal reflection to look at the stuff that gets to you emotionally, I think you learn a lot really, really fast. But because we've been comfortable for so long, and anything that seeks to break that comfort, which is a news story about we're going to put a rainbow community centre in your community, and all I've ever heard is fear mongering, I've finally got a battle to fight and it's going to shake up my comfort. Well, we have to be uncomfortable about this debate because I'm uncomfortable about it now. And
Yeah.
I think the only way we get through it is being uncomfortable together, being empathic together, seeking to understand together, and then realizing we have agency to make the change that is desperately needed.
I think that that's a fantastic way to wrap this up because that is such a powerful statement. So, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, if they want to dig into this conversation more, if they want to learn more or communicate with you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
So there's 2 ways. So the chrisrhyss.com, which is Chris, RHYSS.co, sorry, is my website. And you can Google me because there's enough Google information there. And if they want to know about the woke paradox, you can go to thewokeparadox.com. It'll take you straight to Amazon and you can read about it. And I invite people who totally disagree with me to be my most fervent customers because I want you to pull it apart. Because that means, number one, you're weighing in on the debate. And if you can't pick up my book, which is 168 pages, and there's not something, at least one point in there that you agree with, then I've missed something and I want to hear that.
I love that. I love that. We'll put that all in the show notes. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.